Good afternoon, all. Let's just get started. Let's go to Ecclesiastes, the second chapter, the 26th verse. Ecclesiastes, the second chapter, the 26th verse, where it says, "For Yahweh gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. But to the sinner, he gives labor to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him who is good before Elohim. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit." And some say, well, what's that got to do with us? It'll become clear as we go through this. As, what does it say? Just as the tree of knowledge was the first temptation in the Garden of Eden, so today it is still one of the first big temptations we have to deal with from the devil, because he uses this, and that's still what man still strives for today. We all say we want to know it all. It makes me think about a cartoon I saw once where this guy was, well, you know, we're gonna tell you something that you really need to know. Well, what's that? He says, we're gonna tell you the day you're gonna die. He said, in all honesty, just let me be surprised, okay? Just let me be surprised, if you don't mind. I don't need to know it all. But of course, this is the cause of most of the major stress of today's materialistic society. This climbing and climbing up the ladder, learning more and more, becoming better educated and becoming more abreast of things, being so sure with our knowledge. This total education society, they call it. Yet the homeless are still here with us. But this is the world's way. As long as it's not touching us particularly, we can just exist and pretend it doesn't exist, as if it's not there, and move on without. And they'll even hear the Christians that'll jump in now and say, well, if you're not blessed, you must be doing something wrong. But that's the world's way. That's not, however, Elohim's way. Note that in the modern world, the more education you have, the bigger job you can get. The more money you can make. The more things you can buy. And theoretically, the happier and more successful you will be. But talk to people who have gone this route, and the stories that you hear will be quite different. And they will have nuances that the everyman will go through a lifetime and may never hear these. These are some true tales of woe attached to this dollar-chasing way of life. Man, everybody has them. Everybody can tell you, oh, I know a guy that's got 2 PhDs, and if you go out there in about an hour, you'll probably see him out there on the corner on Halsted, panhandling. And you wonder, how can that happen? And then I think about something Don King said once, only in America. Only in America. But you see, in this modern age, however, all you hear about is how to get this world's education. Elohim often spoke of knowledge, but his nuance in this, as it is written, is a little bit different than the world's understanding of it. Let's go and look up Psalms, the 111th chapter, the 10th verse. Psalms, the 111th chapter, the 10th verse, where it says, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom. All practicing them have good understanding. His praise stands forever. But you see, most of this world's education has totally supplanted any knowledge of the Godhead. And frankly, right now, that's not considered to be knowledge at all. It's considered superstition. They'll tell you that's just fairy tales, if you will. Frankly, sin and evil have a higher placement in this world as far as the pecking order and how they think of things. Has a much higher placement in this world than any knowledge of the word of Elohim. Why? Because both sin and evil make plenty of money in this modern age. Modern middle-class parents, before the child is out good, they start looking for good placements for their children in even preschools. You've heard this. Yeah. Almost before they can walk or even say their first words, before they even know their name, or sometimes even before they can say, and they get this first in most cases, Dada. Dada, the ladies are like, but that's how it is. It's just something about it's easier to say. So they get that first. Don't take it personally. It is what it is. You'll get sick of it. I think about that guy that we saw getting arrested downtown one time. They had him up against the wall. The police had him up. He had his up. And what was the first word out of his mouth? Mama! So they get it eventually. They get it eventually. Maybe not always the way we would like, but they get it eventually. But these parents, they want these kids in preschools. They want them in, they got to be the good preschools, you know, the ones that lead to the Ivy League and so forth. So they want them in there before they can walk well. These parents, of course, want their child to be, see if this word sounds familiar to you, they want them to be competitive. They want them to be able to compete with the children of other countries who do it in a far less challenging and stressful way than we do. Except maybe the Chinese. In China, failure is pretty much tantamount to suicide. But middle-class Americans want to raise a nice little brain child. They get this wild look in their eyes and they tell you, I want him or her to have a good job and I want them to make lots of money. I want them to be accepted by society. But what they really are saying without realizing it is, I want them to be a product of the system. What system is that? A product of the American, or soon to be, they don't realize it yet, but soon to be actually becoming, much of it already is, a global, worldwide, corporate system. No borders anymore. It'll all be one. You even hear some of these old guys like Kissinger, it'll be a better world when it's all one world government, running everything, controlling everything. And it's obvious that Mr. Kissinger, maybe, I shouldn't say that, but maybe he's not reading the Bible. Maybe he doesn't understand it, or maybe he does understand it. Maybe all those years out there in the Bohemian Grove maybe taught him something we don't know. Oh, did he say Bohemian Grove? Oh, that's conspiracy stuff. He can't say that. Too late. But not understanding fully what all of this means and what all of this entails, behind the scenes, this is what parents want for their children. So they unknowingly abdicate their responsibility as parents and individuals in bringing up and training their own children, and they turn their children over as living sacrifices to an educational system that is godless to the core, where they will be compelled to worship and learn to love the false gods of this world from the time they're 4 years old until they're 22 years old, or older if they go for a master's or maybe a PhD, which is now necessary to climb into the upper rungs of corporate management in America. In a twisted way, knowing some of the rigors at the upper levels, not from the inside, you watch it from the outside, it reminds me psychologically of the ancient heathen practice of causing their children to pass through the fire. Let's go to Leviticus, the 18th chapter, the 21st verse. Leviticus, the 18th chapter, the 21st verse, where it says, "And you shall not let any of your seed pass through the fire to Molech. Neither shall you profane the name of your Elohim. I am Yahweh." I like the way he did that. I like the way he did that. Whenever he can tell you something, he doesn't come back and say, "Listen to what I'm saying." He just says, "I am." And that's your punctuation that says, oops, that's it. He's done. He has spoken. He says, "I am Yahweh." In other words, if there's nothing else to be said, I am. And to further understand this, Psalms, the 106th chapter, the 36th verse. Psalms, the 106th chapter, the 36th verse, where it says, "And they served their idols, which were a snare to them. Yea, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters to demons, and shed innocent blood, even the blood of their sons and of their daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan. And the land was filled with blood." Now, of course, in the context of these scriptures, these deluded Molech-worshiping parents would offer physically their babies and children to the devil god Moloch, or Molech, a huge idol which had movable arms, hinged at the elbows, and had a big yawning mouth with a huge fire pit built into the inside of it. They'd offer the children to this idol, placing them in the open arms. And the priests of Moloch would stand behind this idol and would pull a lever that would pull the rope, and the arms would pull the child forward, and it would go into the mouth and go into this idol's mouth into a live fire, burning them up forever. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that this is what these modern parents are doing physically. No. That's why I said psychologically. But if you don't know what's being taught to your children, you really don't know what is being placed in their minds. Do you? I could tell you tales about what went on, but that was years ago. It's gotten worse. I could talk about what we dealt with going with Rashida through grade school and then high school and all, but it's gotten worse. You see, today's children are forced by their parents and the system's compulsory education laws into the clutches of the modern system of education, a system that is guided by a group whose goals and objectives are far different than you think they are. Far different than they should be, and even more different than most parents have any idea is going on there. What's happening in these schools right now is just unbelievable. They go in as innocent children and come out as psychological wards of the state. All of this is planned very slowly and very carefully, you see. Our American society is shifting from one that cherishes individual liberties and freedoms, and it's starting to turn into one that is fully embracing a little concept called, see if anybody's heard this, collectivism. Collectivism. The practice or principle of giving a group priority over each individual in it. The world is being slowly shaped into this mindset, and children must learn it first. You see, they will grow up already pre-adjusted to it, so when it gets to the point where it could become dangerous to them, they're so used to it, it's like the frog in the boiling water. It's already good and hot, but they didn't jump out and jump back in, so they don't realize how hot it is. It's just nice and comfortable for them because they've been getting it since they were 4. It appears on its surface a good idea. Oh, learn to like everybody, get along with everybody, understand their point of view, deal with them as humans, as people, and love them all. Most will tell you that most of the Bible, however, with its laws, covenants, and rules, already lean toward a collectivist mindset. This is true. But the chief mind in this case is Elohim. Okay? It's the mind of God, not the mind of man. For this reason, so long as you're following the laws, commandments, and instructions of Elohim, we're fine. We do just fine. And we found out why a long time ago. We found out in Isaiah, the 55th chapter, the 8th verse. It keeps coming up because it's real. Isaiah, the 55th chapter, the 8th verse, where it says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor your ways my ways, says Yahweh. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For as the rain comes down and the snow from the heavens and does not return there, but waters the earth and makes it bring out and bud and give seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word be which goes out of my mouth. It shall not return to me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall certainly do what I sent it to do. For you shall go out with joy and be led out with peace. The mountains and the hills shall break out before you into singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands." Psalms, the 92nd chapter, the 4th verse. Psalms, the 92nd chapter, the 4th verse, where it says, "For you, Yahweh, have made me glad with your work. I will triumph in the works of your hands, O Yahweh. How great are your works. Your purposes are very deep." Wait a minute. Deep? Well, let's look at that word in a more expansive context. Let's look at it in the Hebrew. Deep. The word H6009, for those who were studying, almak. Almak. Meaning a sign or an act from Yahweh which can be deep, profound, spanning the universe in its profundity. In other words, it's so deep that it's deeper than the universe as a whole. I was looking at something, I think it was Sandy put out on Facebook a little while back, where they were starting with somebody's eye, and it ended in the whole universe and all of the suns and all of the stars that were so much bigger than our own sun. And people that have never seen that before, like, wow. This is the mind that created all that. Think about it. And you think that you can compete with that? Oh, really? You see, man cannot do this. Man cannot fairly judge the earth. Only Elohim can. Thus, it is different when the collective is managed or governed by man. The devil got a hold of the right part of the system to really reprogram the kids. And in some places like the USA, he's got complete control of the public school system. And he's got it just where he wants it. Prayer is forbidden. Oh, individual prayers are allowed. They don't tell you that sometimes. See, you have to be careful when you're dealing in a world where everything is broken into right and left or conservative and liberal or progressive. So each side tends to want to lie for their own side. So you may never get the truth unless you just happen to be on the ground and see it all and say, oh, I know what's really going on here. But prayer is forbidden. But individual prayers are allowed. But it is, however, unlawful for the school to initiate a prayer service or allow in any formal way public prayers, which I think is ridiculous. God, you see, is outlawed, if you will, save for a few southern schools where it is taught in the very Southern style. In other words, it's on Sunday, just going to say it. In most other schools, however, the Bible is banned as reading material. Religion is illegal, except, of course, in parochial schools. But in public schools, their false religion of evolution is all you're going to get, which is perfectly legal as far as they're concerned. And as far as they care, it's the only religion that there is. Therefore, it is allowed. In fact, it's the religion of the public educational system, which shows how modern education is designed in a secular fashion to undermine faith. Faith in Elohim, faith in the Bible, and they encourage faith in man. They encourage faith in man's wisdom and his science and his other things. We'll get into that later. This year, it got very interesting. Washington State's school children as young as 5 years old will instead of biology, will be learning about, perk your ears up, gender fluidity. And the differences between gender and sexual identity. 5 years old. At 5 years old. What did he say? I don't care how you bring them, but bring them young. The newly minted health and physical education standards released by the Washington Office of Superintendent of Public Education, the OPSI, will be implemented in schools across the state for the 2017-2018 school year. As reported by the Daily Caller of Seattle, the new standards require students to learn about gender identity and expression beginning at the old age of 5, kindergarten. Kindergartners. You see, Satan also knows you must bend the sapling when it's young in order to win them over to his dark side. Deal with this, if you like, curriculum. Beginning in kindergarten, students will be taught about the many ways to express gender. Gender expression education will include information about the manifestations of traits that are typically associated with one gender or the other. However, cross-dressing is one taught form of gender expression. That's exactly how I felt. And it gets worse. Of course, when they get older, they get more. Third graders will be introduced to the concept of gender identity. These children will be taught that they can choose their own gender. Fourth graders will be expected to define sexual orientation, which refers to whether a person identifies as heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual. Fourth graders, people? Fourth graders? They'll also be taught about HIV prevention. And I won't even tell you about all the ways they're going to teach them, where they're teaching them how to roll a condom in fourth grade. Children in fourth grade will be told that they can choose their sexual orientation. Man is at the height of intelligence, huh? Bunch of knuckle dragging. Shut up, Ray. And why, and like I said, fourth and fifth graders will learn about the relativity of gender roles. In other words, today you can be a girl and tomorrow you can be something else. And they will learn about the relativity of gender roles and why such roles are social constructs. Oh, you're not born that way. The society forces this upon you. And you learn why such roles are social constructs that are not inherent to who we are as male or female human beings. You see, the brainwash becomes more finely defined as the children grow older and have heard nothing else. Thus, all of a sudden, what sounded like insanity to us, by the time they get to be 11 or 12, it becomes their psychological reality. Seventh graders will be expected to distinguish between biological sex, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. High school students will critically evaluate how culture, media, society, and other people influence our perception of gender roles, sexuality, relationships, and sexual orientation, which, according to them, by this time, you can wake up one morning and be whatever you want to be, no matter what the fundamental wiring says you are. And they say Christians are crazy? Don't believe me? Ask your school-age children. You see, here's the problem. This began on the coasts in New York and in California. But I don't know if you all have noticed it, but it is slowly sweeping across the country like wildfire. Because in almost every state, there's a little group of activists that go down to your state house and they're lobbying your senators, your House of Representatives to put this stuff through as a higher form of education for your children. You see, for in this collective construct, schools are no longer even accepting the truth of biology as known from the beginning of scientific discovery and knowledge. What is in the collective mind will suddenly become reality. Why? Because it's all they've known. Thus, the worship of Elohim in any form will be slowly dissolved in public school. And eventually, and some say it's starting already at the collegiate level, I would say that's true, the worship of Elohim will become a thing of the past. Instead, the worship is to become that of fallen man, as opposed to the worship of Elohim. The Apostle Paul, interestingly enough, spoke of this in Romans, the 1st chapter, the 21st verse. Romans, the 1st chapter, the 21st verse, where it says, because knowing Elohim, they did not glorify him as Elohim. Neither were thankful, but they became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible Elohim into an image made like corruptible man. And we have no idea how corruptible. And birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. You see, these teachings get deeper and they get more immoral in the high schools. And has reached fever pitch and insanity at the collegiate level. Knowing what was coming, Paul continued in verse 24. Therefore, Elohim also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, for they changed the truth of Elohim into a lie. And they worshiped and served the created thing more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. For this cause, Elohim gave them up to dishonorable affections. For even their women changed the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise, also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust toward one another, males with males, working out shamefulness and receiving in themselves the recompense which was fitting for their error. And even as they did not think fit to have Elohim in their knowledge, Elohim gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do the things not right. Being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness. Whoa, 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 whoa. Did anybody notice how all of a sudden this became all sin? He's telling us something here. Notice what he's telling us here. He's not saying, oh, homosexual is the worst thing that could ever be. He's talking about all sin here. Notice this, please. Please notice this. For those who think, oh, I can sneak over there and do something and I'm not as bad as them. No. Sin is sin, baby. Sin is sin. Be honest about it. He is. If we're his, we have to be honest about it too. Being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness. You got to be gay to be covetous? No. Maliciousness. You got to be gay to be malicious? No. Full of envy. Got to be gay to be full of envy? No. Murderers. Got to be? No. You see what I'm saying here? Sin is sin.
Yeah, that's right.
Quarrels. Got to be gay to be a quarreler? No. Deceit. To be a deceitful person, you have to be? No. Evil habits? No. Becoming whisperers? No. Backbiters, haters of Elohim, insolent, proud, braggarts, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents. Kind of pulled everybody in there, didn't he? Undiscerning, perfidious, without natural affection, unforgiving, unmerciful, who, knowing the righteous order of Elohim, that those practicing such things are worthy of death. Oh, just the homosexuals are worthy of death, right? No, that's not what it said. It said all those practicing such things are worthy of death. Not only do them, but have pleasure in those practicing them. Not just that stuff, all of it. But for those who wondered, this is why so many believing families have begun removing their children from the public schools and started homeschooling their children. Right now, because of the rise of homeschooling and the infrastructure that allows it, this errant teaching is avoidable. And many parents and parenting groups are fighting it, but with little success in the public schools, because this is part of the plan. A plan that they think that they're being big-brained about it, and they don't realize that they're being manipulated by Hasatan. You see, this is obviously a curriculum that is championed by the United Nations and agreeable to the Agenda 21 planners. How many of you have actually heard of Agenda 21? How many of you have computers? Go out to www.agenda21.org, I think it is. Agenda, A-G-E-N-D-A 21.org. I think it's either .org or I don't think it's government yet, because technically it's not a government yet. So I think it's .org. It may be gov, however. Eventually we know it will be. But you take a look at that thing. I read through the whole thing, and it's scary. It's scary, and they intend to do it on so many different levels as far as how they're going to appropriate land in certain areas. You're not going to be allowed to live there. The document is scary enough as itself, but everybody that's up there in Washington signed off on it. Right or left, they all signed off on it. So it is what it is. We're headed for a one world government, whether we like it or not. But you see, this anti-God agenda continues on into the halls of academia. Most universities and colleges and even seminaries and Bible schools are now run by men who don't know the answers any more than the poor students that they're supposed to be teaching. They, as Yeshua said, are blind leaders of the blind. And just as he said, they're both going to fall into the ditch. Matthew, the 15th chapter, the 13th verse. But he answered and said, every plant which my heavenly Father has not planted shall be rooted up. Bet on this. Be sure in it. Let them alone. He here says, specifically speaking of the Pharisees, but could be also talking about all of these other little things that are going on in these schools. They are blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. That's why the world is in this ditch today. Because its leadership is blind. Blind shepherds leading blind sheep. And they're all falling into the ditch of perdition together. Unless they return to the truth of Elohim, for there is no other way. Neither the shepherds nor the sheep know which way they're going. The only difference is that the shepherds are hypocrites. And they pretend to know, even though they don't know. Why do you think so many come out? They talk about how ministers go to seminary and they come out. And a lot of them walk away from theology because they're so confused by what they learned there that everything that they learned from the Bible just doesn't make sense. It all gets twisted. And they walk away. And they wonder why they called the seminary the cemetery. Because it's where the truth goes to die. Many professors in theological seminaries teach disciplines that are so nuanced and convoluted that they didn't really know themselves what they were teaching. But they only pretend because they're ashamed to admit that they don't know. Gets back to one line from Romans 1:22. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Jeremiah, the 8th chapter, the 9th verse. Jeremiah, the 8th chapter, the 9th verse, where it says, the wise men are ashamed, they are dismayed and taken. Lo, they have rejected the word of Yahweh, and what wisdom is in them. Hey, once they've turned away from the word of Yahweh, what wisdom could possibly be there? Why are we listening? What wisdom is in them? If they reject the word of Yahweh, what have they got left? Nothing. Without Elohim's word, there is nothing. No wisdom and no knowledge, nothing that amounts to anything that is worth anything. So here they all have these great temples to education, secular and sacred. Yet without the word of Elohim, they're simply the universities of blah, 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 blah. It's almost like you go to school and you feel like you remember the old Linus, the Peanuts college, where the teacher, and you hear the teacher, and the teacher would just be like, what? That's all you heard. That's how you feel when you go to some college now. All of it is just so much wasted time and effort without the word of Elohim. Without the Bible and the wisdom of Elohim, they're nothing. They're set up to come out. If you go to school and you're set up to come out as slaves to the current world. Oh, you're making nice money as accountants, clerks, computer technicians, doctors. I know a bunch of doctors. A lot of them have walked away from their practices because they realize that they're nothing but glorified drug dealers, pill pushers, whatever you want to call them. Ask them, they'll tell you. Doctors, they're doctors who depend on pharmaceutical labs to manage the illnesses of their patients. Don't speak of curing over a whisper, because nobody talks about curing a disease anymore. Why would you want to cure a disease when you can manage the disease and make so much more money? Besides fulfilling its primary purpose of brainwashing and mentally conditioning people as cogs in the wheels of this world, what has today's modern educational system really taught its young people? It's crammed their heads with a bunch of facts and then not taught them how to use what good facts are there, and has taught them nothing for any moral purpose or use. Having tossed away the divine, they have not told them how to love Elohim or to even find him in the modern world in any real sense. And as the corporate world becomes competitive and the streets devolve into an urban jungle, no one knows how to love their fellow man or how to be happy. So many of our young people contemplate suicide because they openly wonder, especially with no understanding of the world to come, what good is living? Suicide numbers are off the charts. And many find this hard to believe, but it's true. The highest rates of suicide are notable. Notice who's killing themselves these days. 85% of the numbers that they've contributed here. They say of them, 19.3% of all suicides reported were reported by people above the age of 85. The second group is middle-aged persons between the ages of 45 and 64, with a total of 19.2 of total suicides. That's like 1 in 5. Younger people have fewer cases of suicides, while teenagers contribute 11.6% of the reported suicides. That's the ones that are reported. That's the ones you know about. It could be higher or lower. You really never really know. Here's where it gets interesting, for me anyway. Caucasian people in the U.S. have recorded the highest rates of suicide at 14.7%, followed by the Native American people at 10.9%, Hispanic people at 6.3%. I hate when you do these surveys and they say blacks, whites, and these are people. Leave that word there. Don't take that last vestige of humanity away from them. At least give them that. That's part of the reason they want to kill themselves, because they're not taken as people anymore. Oh, the blacks, the Caucasians, the Indians, the Japanese, Come on. We've got to see ourselves again as people, and people of Elohim, if nothing else.
That's right.
Continuing on. Hispanic or Latino people at 6.3%. Asian people and Pacific Island people, 5.9%. With the lowest rates being, you got something good. Lowest rate of suicide among American people of African descent, 5.5%. Now, firearms are the most used method in suicide, with 49.9%. In other words, 1 out of every 2 suicides, somebody took a gun and blew their brains out. That's mind-blowing. 49.9% of the deaths by firearm. 26.7% just found a way to suffocate themselves. Locked themselves in the garage, turned the car on, and didn't bother. Or other ways to just cut off all the air. Some just held their breath. You can get bad enough to feel that way. Oh yeah. Now, 15.9% poisoned themselves. And all other methods combined contribute to the last 7.5% of the deaths. Due to the stigma attached to suicide, most of the cases go unreported or untreated. So a lot of these figures may actually be a little off, high or low. We really don't know. But suicide rates in the U.S. have increased overall by 24% in the last 15 years. Went from 10.5% to 13% in the last 15 years. What that number is, let's put that number in some numbers that can wrap your head around it and say, wow, 10.5 people out of every 100,000 persons there are. Out of roughly, in this country, what, 300 billion? 300 million? Whoa, that's a lot of people that just decide. I had gone to see somebody at a concert a few years ago and was asking about something, and she looked me dead in the eye and said, well, you know, if things get too bad, I know where the off switch is. A year later, she was gone. This is real. This is real. And Satan loves it. He loves it. But you see, suicide takes up 24% of all the allocated funds for fatal injuries, causing massive economic losses. And that's so funny to me. We're talking about life and death. And the only thing they can think about is how much money we lost by these people being stupid and killing themselves. That's all they can think about. I'm sure other people look at that, wow, thanks for all the information. No, thanks for being unfeeling. That's part of the reason some of them did it. But then when the answers come, you realize that's probably is. The most common reasons for committing suicide. The most common cause for suicide is depression. Most of the people who have committed suicide are known to be chronically depressed and feel that death is the only form of escape and relief from their situation, whatever that situation is. Depression is mainly caused by alcoholism, terminal illness, substance abuse. Few will admit that many of these are because of the increased use of dangerous opioid prescription drugs leading to other drugs that maybe they started to use after the doctor said, we have to wean you off of this, but the body says, I want more. When it was just heroin, it was no big deal. Now Trump's talking about it, but we won't go there. Let you know that that it changed in terms of who's being affected. Other reasons for suicide: financial difficulties, relationship problems, perceived life failure. And here's one we may recognize, but for a long time we had to just put up with it: bullying. Illnesses such as schizophrenia, mental disorders, and personality disorders compel some people to kill themselves. People with past self-harming tendencies or attempted suicides, be aware of this, are most likely, if their situation doesn't change, to attempt suicide again. So when you hear somebody talk about doing it, don't just, that's just talk. Get them looked at. Find out what's really going on and get them to talk. Don't just blow it off and don't let them blow it off. Talk to them. Find out what's going on. You see, there's little statistical evidence to back this, but I believe many of these school shootings are attempts at suicide by a cop. I'll explain. Problem is, the police won't shoot them because most of the school shooters are not minority and less likely to be shot dead by police. And some people say, that's bigotry. No, it's not. Look at the numbers. Look at how many times, look at what happens. You go out and shoot out 8 or 9 people in a church, you bring them out, what they do? Oh, let's go to McDonald's. Another kid's walking down the street by himself, walking away from the police, they shot him 14 times. Laquan McDonald. I mean, the numbers are here. You got to be realistic about these things and be honest about them. Some of these people probably think, well, they'll probably kill me. Except for you go in there with, how did Paul Mooney say it? You got the complexion for the protection. I'm just being honest. I got no choice here. I'm just being real. You choose not to, this is the world you live in. I live in it too, but I see it a little bit clearer because you see more. It's real. But it's real. They will. But the problem is, you can laugh about that, but the fact of the matter is, surely we have 5.5 on suicide, but why do we keep killing each other? That's the thing. That's the insanity that's got to stop. That's the insanity that's got to stop. But with the world as insane as it is, and so few people able to cope with it successfully, it's obvious that Satan's plan of total confusion is working. The confusion of education, the competitive workplace, competing to see who's the first to the bottom, whether you see it that way or not. That's what's happening. Look at your markets. Up, down, which means there's nothing solid to lay on. Eventually, it's going to collapse. They just keep throwing money at it and hoping it'll prop it up. Countrywide bigotry, divisive politics, all of these things serve to make life as complicated as possible. After all, that's the devil's whole job, to try to bring confusion. In fact, the Bible says he's the author of confusion. Go to 1 Corinthians, the 14th chapter, the 33rd verse. He's the author of confusion. And warns us, and it warns us not to be led astray from the simplicity that is in Messiah. Especially not by simplistic, easy ways to be saved, taught by charlatans out to get your money. That's what's fascinating in all of this. There's more religious activity than ever, but less prayer in reality than ever. Many believe in these men because they don't take the time to truly learn the plan of salvation. Because they're so busy trying to get back to the rat race pace of the world so that they can succeed there while losing your very soul. Not understanding the eternal value of the most important part of your life, your conversion unto salvation. You see, a widespread false teaching in the churches today is that you can accept Christ as your Savior, but that obeying him as Lord is optional. Those who promote this teaching mistakenly think that they're preserving the doctrine of salvation by grace through faith apart from works. Many will fall if they don't learn this correctly. Let's go to Luke, the 6th chapter, the 46th verse. There is another way out, and it's time to learn it. Luke, the 6th chapter, the 46th verse, where it says, "And why do you call me Master, Master, and do not do what I say? Whoever comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you to whom he is like. He's like a man who built a house and dug deep and laid the foundation on a rock. And a flood occurring, the stream burst against the house and could not shake it, for it was founded on a rock. But he who hears and does not perform is like a man who built a house on the earth without a foundation, on which the stream burst, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great." Matthew, the 7th chapter, the 24th verse. Matthew, the 7th chapter, the 24th verse, where it says, "Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on a rock. And the rain came down, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. And it did not fall, for it was founded on a rock. And everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them," oh, you don't have to keep that law. That stuff is, "shall be compared to a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain came down, and the floods came, and the wind blew and beat on that house. And it fell, and great was its fall. And it happened when Yeshua had ended these sayings that the people were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority, not as the scribes. who, if you remember what the scribes would always say, oh, Rabbi so-and-so says this. Prophet so-and-so says this. Wouldn't take ownership of it. So he says, I say. For he taught them as one having authority, not as the scribes. He does have authority. That's why he was able to do that. Has all authority in his hands, ready to give all to his brethren for simple obedience, love, and fellowship. He has done the heavy lifting already, but he didn't do it all. He just did the part we couldn't do. We can't, none of us could die for all of us. He has died and set aside the sins of the world. They, however, now need to repent of those sins, accept his sacrifice, and for those who have been baptized, repent of any sins committed after baptism, instead of continuing to think that, oh, he did it all, I don't have to do anything anymore. Doing our best not to repeat those sins and to live as he lived, keeping the law and keeping the holy days. Amen. The sacred days observed by Yeshua and his disciples during his physical lifetime included the weekly Sabbath day, as well as a series of annual festivals, all commanded and directly set in motion by Yahweh. See Leviticus, the 23rd chapter. All of them are listed there. If it's not listed there, oh, well, you know the rules. You see, these days are biblically consecrated and set aside as holy convocations in the scriptures. The only scriptures in existence at the time of Yeshua were the Old Testament or Torah. Therefore, if he spoke of the holy days and Sabbath, these were the days we were expected to keep. The world and its churches, however, declare the other days: Valentine's Day, Easter, Halloween, Christmas, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. Yet none of them are set aside in the Bible. Most of them aren't even named there.
That's right.
Let's go to Ezekiel, the 20th chapter, the 11th verse. Ezekiel, the 20th chapter, the 11th verse. And I gave them my statutes, and I made them know my judgments, which if a man does them, he will even live by them. And I also gave them my Sabbaths, plural. If it was only one day, why would it be plural? Because whenever he says that, Sabbaths, he's talking not only of the Sabbath, the weekly Sabbath, but also the holy days. And I gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am Yahweh who sets them apart. We're set apart for a purpose, to show the world a different and better way to live, to show the world what Elohim expects of all people ultimately. John, the 14th chapter, the 15th verse. John, the 14th chapter, the 15th verse, where it says, if you love me, keep my commandments. Stay in John the 14, let's go down to verse 21. John, the 14th chapter, the 21st verse, where he says, he that has my commandments and keeps them, it is that one who loves me. And the one that loves me shall be loved by my Father, and I shall love him and will reveal myself to him. Judas said to him, not the Iscariot, Master, what has happened, that you are about to reveal yourself to us and not at all to the world? Yeshua answered and said to him, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. And my Father shall love him, and we will come to him and will make a dwelling place with him. The one who does not love me does not keep my words or my commandments. And the word which you hear is not mine, but of the Father who sent me. I have spoken these words to you, abiding with you. But the Comforter, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he shall teach you all things and shall remind you of all things that I have said to you. I leave peace to you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, I give to you. Let not your heart be troubled, nor let it be timid. You heard that I say to you, I am going away, and I am coming again to you. If you loved me, you would have rejoiced that I said, I am going to the Father, for my Father is greater than I. And now I have told you before it occurs, that when it shall occur, you may believe. We must believe and live as if we believe. Only in this way can our lives be witness to those who do not believe. It's sad how ignorant his people have become of these things. They've abandoned Yeshua and forsaken the Father, who is the source of all wisdom and all knowledge, all that is good, all that is helpful, all that is useful in the world. They think they're becoming smarter and more scientific, but they're actually becoming duller and more ignorant in the things that really count. You see, in these last days, they shall be ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. You find that in 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, the 7th verse. What wisdom is in them? Nothing. None. Because if you haven't got Elohim and you don't believe his word, there's no goal in living. There's no reason for existence. You're all going to die anyway, and you're going to be moldering in the grave forever. So what was all this for? What was all this for? What was all this for? There's got to be a bigger plan. Got to be. But you see, if you haven't got Elohim, you don't have his word, there is no goal. There is no other reason. There's no reason for existence. There's no plan. You have no solutions. And life seems all a waste. True salvation, however, offers eternal, vibrant life with the goal of recreating first a perfect earth. Then a vibrant, living universe. And the worst thing you can do is miss out on this, believing that this evil world is all there is. Find a group now. Learn of the truth of Elohim. Begin to understand him and understand him in spirit and in truth. The whole modern antichrist system of education and false religion has taken on the attitude that there are no absolutes. Anything you can conjure up in your mind is real to you. They even set you up for that years ago. Well, whatever he thinks, that must be what it is to him. It's insanity. Absolute insanity. This whole principle, this whole idea that everything is fluid, everything can be, you can be anything you want to be, even if you're not that. Nothing is certain, nothing is sure in this world. But the return of Yeshua and the overturn and ending of this evil system of Satan is sure. Now, as we come near the beginning of the holy calendar, now is the time to learn of the truth of Elohim and come out of this fallen, fractured, broken, twisted, mutilated world. It has nothing of lasting value to offer. Seek Messiah while he may be found. Learn of him and learn his truth. For those who missed the title, this is true higher education.